Hi, my name's Jason Petkovic. I'm General Manager of a company called Angelo Petkovic Cabinets. It's a family business and I'm sort of the next generation. We specialise in cabinet making. We manufacture cabinets and so forth. We specialise in residential work. And for the last 50 odd years, it's been 95% of our work. So most of our work comes from builders that specialise in that area of the market, which includes cabinet making, kitchens, laundries, vanities, the obvious ones. But then we go into other areas like studies, alfrescos, wardrobes, living areas, TV cabinets. So it pretty much covers a full house fit out from the kitchen all the way to even tables. We've done dining tables before. So we're very much a bespoke, custom cabinet making workshop. We have 20 people working for us. We have admin staff that collate all the information and do the quoting, and then we have drafts people, machinists, assemblers, installers, we have polishers. So there's quite a wide variety of people that are in the company. We have pretty much the latest machinery and computer software to manufacture custom furniture for houses. We have builders, and these builders already have architectural design drawings or designer drawn drawings. They hand those drawings to us, and then we take over from there. We collate all this information so we can pass it on to the drafts people. So then when the drafts people get it, they have a picture, 95% picture of what needs to be drawn, and then they go through the process of drawing it. Now, the software that we use is AutoCAD based, so it draws as you would make it. So from that, we can have a render drawing, but it can be broken down into parts. So that allows us to transfer it to a CNC machine to be cut for us and ready for assembly. That drafting process requires a lot of backwards and forwards between the client and us in order to achieve an approved drawing. It's not always start today, finish today, and cut tomorrow. It's a bit of a drawn out process. It sort of affects the way we schedule things a little bit too. But once it's approved, then we go to machining. It gets cut on the CNC machine and edged and ready and put into trolleys ready to be put into the assembly department. So from there, we have assemblers and they all put everything together. So ideally, we like to mock everything up here in the workshop floor. We like to put it all together, put the appliances in and everything like that. So we know it's going to work, it's going to fit correctly when we get to site. So once that's all been signed off on, whether it's someone internally overseas or the client comes and has a look at it, once it's all done, we pull it apart. And then as most of our stuff's bespoke and custom, a lot of it's lacquered and veneered. So from that point there, we disassemble everything and we prepare the carcasses to be delivered to site, but then we prepare the panels and the doors and everything to be sent to the polishing department. So at that point, you've got two different paths. The cabinets get sent to site, ready for installation, and then obviously the other parts get sent to the polisher to either get lacquered or to get veneered. So from there, our installations are probably at 2 or 3 stages. The first stage is get the carcasses in, and then once we get the polished panels and the lacquered panels, then we sort of put them in, and then at the end we have to come in and final fit and clean it up and do all the detailing. So that pretty much covers most of the processes in our business. I think it doesn't vary too much from other cabinet makers, but it just involves a bit more labour intense sort of focus, I suppose, in a lot of the work that we do. And as you can see, there's a lot of parts to it, and it's a lot of floating sort of areas that sort of get done and then put aside, and then we go into something else. And so there's a lot of juggling to do in order to keep track of it all and control it all. It's sort of grown as we've increased in turnover. The less jobs, obviously, that requires less attention because you know pretty much where everything is. And at that stage, it was pretty much a whiteboard, effectively. But as you start to turn over more, you've got more jobs to worry about. And you're not necessarily starting one job and finishing it tomorrow. It's a case you start one job, you put it aside until other things are ready, but in the meantime, you've moved on to another job. So as we've started to do more and more jobs, it's become more and more difficult to sort of keep control of that and also monitor it. And it just became too confusing, and you couldn't remember all the jobs. I've gone from, say, 5 jobs to remembering 20 jobs, and so it became too much. So from there, I went from a whiteboard, I went to a spreadsheet, which I thought we'd done all right. But again, as you grow, there's more and more jobs. And some jobs get put aside for a month or two. In the meantime, you've gone ahead and done other jobs. Trying to keep track at what stage those jobs are became more and more difficult. And a spreadsheet didn't quite capture it. It was jumping from one A1 to AZ1 or something like that, and it became just too much to sort of capture everything. We started looking for a scheduling software, and we came across a few different ones, but one that caught my eye was Infoboard, because it gives you a visual picture of what it looks like in terms of where your jobs are. And that was the biggest selling point for me. It allowed me to have a snapshot where everything is, as opposed to a spreadsheet where I had to see the date here or see a date there. So it was never really a full picture. With Infoboard, it gives me a visual picture of what it might look like. It doesn't always necessarily work out the way, as you might know. Planning never does, but at least it allows me to plan ahead. So I think that was pretty much my journey from whiteboard to Infoboard. We went from whiteboard to spreadsheet. So I think that process there prepared us for Infoboard, because once you go from whiteboard to spreadsheet, you have to start thinking about all these different processes, stages of the process, statuses, and all that sort of stuff. So I think that process there prepared me for Infoboard. The people from Infoboard then took that information and put it into their program, their software, which took a bit of time. It always does, but it sort of gave me a very good picture in terms of what we're budgeting towards, what we're focusing on for the next week, for the next month, next year, which I didn't really have that with a spreadsheet. One of the biggest things I do is I like to plan ahead for the month, so I know what I'm targeting. So for an example, for the month of March, I want to turn over this much, say 300 grand or something like that. So then I know I can go to Infoboard. I know these jobs value that much, and then I start plotting that out. So that has allowed me to plan ahead. Whereas before, I had all these budgets, but it was very difficult to work out what jobs would sort of get me to that desired goal. So being able to plan ahead, for say, example, for a month means that I've allocated jobs for each person in the business, for starters, and each stage of the business. Previously, people had to come up to me and say, what am I doing next? Or what's happening next? Or is there something getting delivered? But now, the Infoboard, it's already been predetermined on the screen what everyone's doing next. So they don't need to come to me. They can just look at the Infoboard. The Infoboard says, all right, you need to go to that job next. And then it's not only a case of, say, for example, the drafts person looking at and saying, well, that's the next job on the rank, but it's also, it makes the admin person aware that that job there needs to be ready for the drafts person to start. And then obviously the next person is the CNC or the machinist. Then they're aware of the fact that we might have this job coming up next. And then in that case, I need to start preparing, getting board in place and all that sort of stuff. And sort of it just flows down the line. It removes me from the day-to-day involvement in order to keep things moving forward, I think is probably the biggest factor. It's taken a bit of time to go from where we were to where we are now with Infoboard, but the next step is for me to have less involvement and more responsibility back on each employee. Currently, in order to update Infoboard, I have to go to all the different people that affect the Infoboard and then ask them where you're at each point in the job, each point of the day. Do you think it'll be finished? There's a bit of a time lost in obviously trying to gather that information and then trying to collate it and then put it into Infoboard so it's reflective of where we are today. And obviously that affects where we're going next day, next week, next month. So the next stage is that I am going to get everyone, let's say, for example, the drafts people, say at the end of the day, if they're almost done a job or if it's been approved, then they're going to notify me on Infoboard that it's been approved. So then I know that job's approved and then they move on to the next job. Or, for example, job could be on hold because client hasn't approved or they want some samples or they want a price variation. So that information will be on Infoboard. So it's not a case of me having to go and ask, let's just say 5 people for all that information. It'll be all there in front of me, or I'm hoping majority will be all there in front of me. So again, that's time I haven't lost in going through the process, which is a critical process. It's not something that I can do off the cuff. So I'm sort of gaining time effectively. And like I said, it falls back on the draftsperson, on the machinist or the assembler to tell me where they're at rather than me going around and asking them. So that is probably my next stage. Currently, I'm probably good for about planning a month ahead. 3 to 4 weeks is probably where I'm at, but still, I don't think it's as good as it could be in terms of planning. So I'm looking to get out maybe 4, 5, 6 months ahead. So I know I have a good idea of what we're doing in the future. I know in my head, but I need to get it out on the screen so everyone knows what's ahead of them. And like I said, by delegating some of that responsibility back to them and obviously concentrating all the information in one screen, it'll allow me to do that. And that takes a lot of time to plan that far ahead, because you have to think of all these sort of things. You have to think of what stage the job's at in terms of whether the house is ready or not, whether we can get the materials, whether the materials have been ordered or it's going to take 4, 5, 6 weeks to get. Is the hardware going to be in time? So all those factors come into play. And so if I get more time, that allows me to plan further ahead, which means it gives me more time to, I think a lot of things that we lose along the way because we're so busy is that we don't, I suppose, work on the business. And a lot of that stuff is processes, making sure the processes are efficient and all those sort of areas. So I think if I can plan ahead, that allows me time to focus on how we can do it better rather than just getting it ready for the client. I recommend implementing Infoboard. For the smaller operators, like when there were 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 people in the business, they could probably handle it by themselves. But once you start getting past the 5, 6, 7, then you start to deal with a lot of jobs and a lot of factors or a lot of processes within each job, which means there's a lot of stuff going on. So from that point onwards, I think Infoboard is very good in giving you that visual picture. And I'm sure a lot of other people like that, because otherwise the alternative is spreadsheets. And once they get too big, they just get unusable, really. From my experience, Infoboard's been very, very helpful in that aspect. And it's, like I said, it's really given me an opportunity to look ahead rather than what needs to be done next week, but what's going to be done in 1, 2, 3, 4, even 6 months in advance. With that sort of future planning, a lot can be achieved